I'm a big believer in learning by doing. And so to learn about functions, we are going to create our own function. It's going to be pretty exciting. This might be the first ever function that you create. You can tell your grandkids about this day. Anyway, so you will learn how to create your own function. That's going to help you understand how functions work and inputs and outputs. And you're also going to learn about the help text of a function and where that comes from. And we are going to create our own help text. And along the way, there's a bunch of other really interesting things that you are going to learn about. So let us switch to Matlab. Now, to create our new function, we need a new script, a blank script. There are several ways that you can get a new blank script in Matlab. You can type edit, and then that will open up a new script. You can, if you already have the editor window open, you can press the plus sign, the little button to the right of the tabs here with a plus sign. That will also create a new one. And you can also click on editor and new script, or you can click on home and new script. So there are many ways that you can create a new script in Matlab. Now, it can be pretty intimidating to look at a blank Matlab file just like this. So let's start by writing down a brief description of what we want this function to do. So I'm going to create this function that will compute a few basic descriptive statistics of a numeric input data set. So let's write, this function computes the mean, sum, and standard deviation of an input numeric vector. And by the way, you'll notice that as I was typing, well, you might not notice, but I will tell you that as I was typing, Matlab automatically moved the line or moved the text to the next line. Matlab decided that this is long enough, this is wide enough for the code for comment, and so it just automatically pushed these two words to the next line. Now I want to start by organizing this function. So I'm going to organize this function into major sections that need to happen inside this function. So the first major section is going to be input checks. So we need to check the input for example, to make sure that the input is numeric. And actually, I think I'll write these down. So we need to check that the input is numeric. And we need to check that the input has at least 3 numbers, and you know, these are inputs that I am imposing here. So we want a numeric input that is at least 3 numbers, and it must be a vector. The input must be a vector, not a matrix. Okay, so the first thing we want to do with this function is check whether the input that the user provides conforms to how we expect the input in the rest of the code. Okay, and then the next thing that we need to do, the next section, which I'm organizing into cells here, or code paragraphs, is to compute the basic statistics. So this is going to be computing the mean. And then here we are going to compute the sum of all the input numbers, and we are going to compute the standard deviation of all the numbers. And then, so then we compute these 3 descriptive statistics, and then what I want to do is display the results to the command window. And then the last thing that I want to do is prepare the output. So this function is going to take an input, and that's going to be this vector. The vector will have to be numeric, at least 3 numbers, and a vector, not a matrix. And we're going to do some statistics, calculate some statistics, and then display some text in the command window and provide an output. And the output will be the mean, the sum, and the standard deviation. Now, I would like you to notice that I still have not written a single line of code. All I've done is create, or not all I've done, but what I have done, which is really important, is to create a high-level organization scheme that's going to help us write all of the code. And anytime you're writing new code, whether it's a function or a script, this is always the way to start. So you want to write some high-level description at the top, And then you should already be thinking about how to organize the code. What are the major sections of the code? What do you need to do? What's the appropriate order for them? And so on. Okay, so this file is called untitled3. This is not actually saved yet. So I'm going to save this, and I will call this basicstats.m. Okay, so now we have our file. Now this is not a function, this is a script. We need to make this be a function. And the way to do that in Matlab, the way to convert a script into a function is really, really simple. All you do is write function. Notice that it turned blue. So I wrote the word function and the font color changed from white to blue. And that's because this word function is a reserved keyword. It's not possible to use this keyword for a variable. So I'm going to call this function basicstats. Now we want an input and we want to provide output. So the way that you do that is by specifying the input in parentheses here. So I'm going to call this in var. So it's going to be the input variable. And then we specify the output here like this. So this is the function call. We say stats equals the function, so the output equals the function name and then the input. Now you can see there's a little red underlined here, and MATLAB is not really happy here. So the issue is that if you can see this little warning message, it says the function return value stats might be unused. So basically MATLAB is saying, hey, you're trying to output a variable from a function, but that output doesn't exist. That variable doesn't exist yet. Well, no surprise, nothing exists inside this function except for some useful comments. So for now, we can simply ignore these warning messages. Now notice also that the name of the function is the same as the name of the file. So the file is called basicstats and the function is called basicstats. If you were to change the name, I'll say q basicstats q. Now MATLAB is giving me a warning, and it says, the warning message says, function name is known to MATLAB by its file name. So you should always keep the function name and the file name to be the same. Now it is possible to write sub-functions, so to have another function inside this function. I'm actually going to show you that in a later video in a later section. But the main function of a file should have the same name as the file name. And that's, that's sensible. That's how MATLAB is going to find this function by looking in this file. Now I wrote that the output variable should be called stats, but what if stats is a function? The term stats seems like it could plausibly be the name of a function. So I need to determine whether this variable or whether this name here refers to an existing variable or an existing function in MATLAB. And to do that, I'm going to use the which function. So I type which and then stats, and MATLAB says stats not found. Now there's a couple of possibilities for what the which function could return. For example, I can type which linspace. We already know that linspace is a function. And then MATLAB returns the the folder location of that function. So that's how we know that linspace is the name of a function. And we can create a variable, let's say x equals 3. And now I can type which x, and MATLAB tells me that x is a variable. So if you're ever concerned that a function or variable that you are thinking of creating is already that name already exists, then you use the which function. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is write out a more detailed set of comments up here just underneath the function line that will tell us what this function does. Now it's common for MATLAB functions to start with a line that shows the basic usage like this. So stats equals basicstats and then invar. And now I'm going to have another line with a comment, and here we say this function computes the blah blah blah, and I'm actually going to override MATLAB's suggestion here to make this line be a little bit longer. What I'd like to do now is list the input. So I'm going to write input is invar, and that is the input vector must be numeric, at least 3 elements long. Okay, and then you can see MATLAB also automatically put long down here, but I'm going to get rid of that here. Okay, so that's the input, and then we have the output. So the output is going to be stats, and let's make this, I want to make this be a 3-element vector containing, and then this is going to contain the mean, the sum, and the standard deviation. Okay, and then it's always good to take some pride and some credit for your hard work. So I'm going to write written by. Now notice what I'm doing here. I'm actually putting in my website here instead of my email address. The thing is, if you were to, if you would like to post your code online on GitHub, on your website, or Google Code, or anywhere else, it's possible that robots will be searching the internet for email addresses, will find your email address, and will start spamming you. So therefore, it's useful to write. So you could do something like one of these tricks where you say, you add spaces in here, that's also fine, or you put your website or anything else, something like that. But it is good to have some identifying information. Okay, so I'm going to save this file. And now what I'd like to show you is what happens when we get help information from this file. So I'm going to type help basic stats. And notice that when I type help basic stats, the output is, or what comes out here in the command, is exactly all of this code that are comments that I've written up here. Now I'd like to show you one other thing. I'm going to break this comment line here. So this is 3 lines of comments and then nothing and then more comments here. And now I'm going to type help basic stats again, and that actually curtailed the help file. So now I only see these first couple of lines. So this tells you about how to create a help file for a function. So all of the unbroken contiguous lines of comments directly at the top of the script can be underneath the function line. It's also possible to define the function right underneath it like this, although I prefer this kind of format. Again, I would like you to notice how much effort, how much time, and how much organization I've already put into this function without actually writing a single line of code. And I want to make that really clear because the more time you spend organizing your functions and your code and thinking about your functions in advance, the more likely you are to write clean, efficient, and fast code with no or very few mistakes. Okay, so now I'm actually ready to start writing real code. So we first want to do input checks. The thing is that running input checks relies on control statements like if statements and for loops that I haven't yet taught you in this course. So I'm going to leave this section empty for now. And for now, we will just assume that the user will always input correctly formatted inputs. I know you're thinking that's a terrible assumption, but I promise we are going to get back to this part of the code in a little bit later in the course. Okay, so let us now switch to this next cell where we compute the basic statistics. So we want the mean, the sum, and the standard deviation. So you might already guess what these MATLAB functions are called. They are called mean of invar, I think, is that what I called it? Yeah. Notice also, by the way, I'm clicking on this variable. So I click on the variable. All the other instances of this variable in the code become colored. Now, they happen to be purple because I selected that color. You can select different colors. And you can also see that they appear here. There's like a thin purple bar, horizontal line over here on the right. I hope you can see that on your screen. And that's showing me where all of the other instances of this variable are in the script. So that's quite a handy little tool here. Okay, so here we compute the mean. And let's call this the mean as a variable name. Here I'm going to compute the sum. And that function is sum. You've already seen that one. And I haven't yet told you what the standard deviation is, or the function for the standard deviation. The standard deviation, of course, is a measure of the dispersion, of the variability of a set of numbers. So let's call this the stdev. And the function is, I don't actually remember what the function is called. So what I'm going to do is type st, because I'm guessing that the function to compute the standard deviation starts with st, and then I'm going to press the tab key, and this is going to tell me all of the functions and all of the variables that start with st. So now we can scroll through all of these, and it looks like it's this one, std. So I selected that and double clicked, or you can also, you can continue typing here. So I just type D. So std in var. So that gives us our 3 input variables here. And then I want to display the results to the command window. So I want the information to print out here in the command window. So to do this, we are going to use a function called disp. This stands for display. And what I want to display is the mean of the input is, so notice I'm using single quotes here. This is going to print a string or character array, is, and then we want to print the mean. And then let's have a period here at the end. Okay, now the thing is, this is not correct. You can already see Matlab is giving us an error message. It says invalid syntax. So what we need to do is concatenate this string, this piece of information, and this string. And how do we do concatenation? I hope you remembered it. It's with square brackets. So we use square brackets here. Okay, now I would like to test this, but we don't actually have invar yet. So I'm going to create a variable, call it invar, and set it equal to, how about 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 9, just so we don't get too boring and go up to 5 like this. Okay, so now I can compute these 3 descriptive statistics, and I'm going to run all these 3 lines of code at the same time by pressing Control Enter. All right, so now I can run this cell, the code in this cell, by pressing Control Enter, and we see that the mean of the input is square. Why does it say square? Well, that's because this variable, the mean, is actually a number. This is a numeric variable, but these are strings. We need to convert this number into a string. So we use the function num to str, and that will convert this number 3.8 into the character array 3.8. And now I can run this code again, and we see the mean of the input is 3.8. All right, very good. So I'm going to copy and paste this entire line so we get the sum and the standard deviation. And then, of course, so whenever you are copying and pasting code, the most important thing to check is that you are changing all of the variable names. So this is no longer the mean, this is the sum, and this is the, and then I'm going to press S and press tab. And now we see we have the standard deviation and the sum. So now I will run all of this code again. Now notice that this actually printed 4 lines, or it looks like it printed 4 lines. This was actually from running it the previous time. So what I want to do is clear the command window. See, we have all this stuff in the command window. I'm going to use the special function CLC. This is for clearing the screen. So when you run this function CLC, notice this function doesn't take any inputs and it doesn't take any or it doesn't provide any outputs. What it does is erase everything from the command window. So that's also important to keep in mind. If you're printing out some important information, it might get lost if you run CLC. But now I can run this, and then we get a nice clean command window with nothing else in here. Now, the last thing that I'm going to do here is to prepare the output. So remember, the output variable is called stats. So I'm going to say stats equals, and then concatenation with square brackets, the mean, the sum, and the stdev. All right. So now what I'm going to do is save this file, and now I'm going to clear the workspace. And then I want to test this function. So I'm going to write basic stats, and we can input a vector. I'll input, how about, this, just some random numbers here. And let's see what happens. Great. So I run this. It says the mean, the sum, and the standard deviation are whatever these numbers mean. And then we get ans, so answer, equals exactly these same numbers. So this is actually the output of the function. So I can run this again, requesting the output. I'll call this out1. And then we get this information printed out. And now if we type whose, I can see that I have the result out one. So I hope you enjoyed this video. We created a function. It's not a totally complete function yet. In order for this to be a production level function, we need to do some additional input checks and so on. But I think this was a great place to start. I hope you enjoyed it.